Welcome, everyone. Hope you're having a good day, depending on where you're calling in from around the world. We have a good group already joining, above 20 participants. So we're going to get started with the fourth AMEA Environmental Working Group webinar or dialogue series. So really glad to have you all here today and really excited about the group of presenters we have for you, all of which are coming from as members and representing their Cash Coalition membership as well. So another network here supporting smallholder farmers around the world. As we get started, and I do this in every single one of our AMEA Environmental Working Group webinars, is to kind of give you a sense of what is the AMEA Environmental Working Group. And this is the objectives for this working group under the Agribusiness Market Ecosystem Alliance Global Working Groups in 2026. Ultimately, our goal this year is to host these webinars so that we can share learning, share understanding, and also kind of identify practical pathways to create impact and change in business development services, market systems, and for agri-SMEs and cooperatives. So that's the ultimate goal. We're also working on behind the scenes a position paper to kind of to organize sectoral learning and to share more with the rest of the international development space, but also really investors and impact investors looking at agri-SMEs. If you're new to the term BDS, and you hear me say it a few times, or business development services, this is just a quick slide, and these presentations and this event is being recorded, so you'll have that afterward. You'll also receive the slides afterwards as well. And so you'll be able to come back to this. So these definitions are really help to kind of ground participants and listeners in the work of AMEA. And then finally, our presenters for today from Root Capital, One Acre Ventures, and Cash Coalition. Really happy to have the whole team here. Elizabeth, Alvin, Rose, and Tracy, they'll all be presenting in sequence. We'll hear from Root Capital first, One Acre Fund Ventures second, and then Tracy will close us out at the end before we move into question and answer. So really glad to have you all here today. One last housekeeping thing before I pass it over to the Root Capital team. If you can stay on mute. And again, if you have any questions or you want to introduce yourself, please do that in the chat during the presentation, and we'll do our best to get to your questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn off my video and pass it over to Elizabeth and Rose from Root Capital.
Great. Thank you so much, Casey. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone. A big thanks to AMEA for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Elizabeth Teague, and I lead Root Capital's Climate Resilience Initiative. And today, my colleague Rose and I are pleased to share more about how Root Capital partners with agri-SMEs to build farmer resilience to climate change, and in particular, how targeted business development services can unlock new climate finance for farmers. Next slide, please. So first, let me introduce you a little bit to Root Capital. Root Capital is an impact investor working to build prosperous and resilient farming communities. Specifically, we invest in agri-SMEs, improving the livelihoods of farmers and workers in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We focus on businesses caught in the missing middle of the financial sector, too big for microcredit, but too small or considered too risky for commercial banks. Our borrowers include agri-SMEs like coffee cooperatives and macadamia nut processors. Since 1999, we provided over $2 billion in financing to over 1,000 agri-SMEs. And about 90% of our loans serve financing needs not served by commercial lenders. As we improve agri-SME access to finance, their impact grows. As one example, on average, Root Capital borrowers show a 20% annual increase in business sales. And this means more money in the hands of farmers, as over 80% of business revenues on average go directly to farmers as payment for their crops. But as my colleague Rose will share, we're not just a lender. Root Capital also provides businesses with capacity building to prepare for financing in the first place, to grow their operations, and to deepen their impact within local communities. Today, we wanted to share more of our work to help agri-SMEs deepen investments in climate action in particular. For years, we've seen that agri-SMEs play a critical role in promoting climate action in smallholder communities. They provide farmers with the market access, training, inputs, and often financing to adopt and sustain regenerative practices. Often, agri-SMEs are the only actors in their communities providing these support services to farmers year in and year out. Today, over 75% of our borrowers qualify as regenerative businesses, meaning they're actively promoting regenerative objectives and practices within their communities. In a recent impact evaluation that we conducted in East Africa and in Central America, 64% of farmers said that their connection to a local agri-SME improved their capacity to recover from a recent climate shock. Of course, agri-SMEs often need financing to sustain and scale their investments in climate action, yet they face a huge access to finance gap as less than 1% of global climate finance reaches smallholder communities. So in response, Root Capital has been designing new climate finance products to help agri-SMEs test and scale promising climate solutions for their businesses and for farmers. We focus on financing that builds local resilience to climate change across 3 dimensions: soil resilience, crop resilience, and business resilience. And we offer 2 financial products to achieve these goals: climate grants and climate loans. On the grant side, we offer small grants of between $10,000 to $20,000 USD to fund early stage pilots and generate proof of concept. And then from there, we can offer larger loans from $20,000 to up to $1 million to scale proven investments. Next slide, please. Over the last decade, we provided over $16 million in climate finance to over 70 agri-SMEs across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, reaching over 6,000 farmers and 16,000 hectares. And we've been really encouraged to see some early signs of impact. On average, agri-SMEs receiving climate finance from Root Capital show a 23% increase in resilience compared to agri-SMEs not receiving climate finance. And that impact seems to be reaching farmers as well. So farmers affiliated with these agri-SMEs who are receiving the climate finance from Root Capital show a 7% increase in their resilience on average. And we're seeing that increased farmer resilience after just 1 year of financing, and even when our financing isn't reaching farmers directly. As I mentioned a moment ago, some agri-SMEs are using our financing to invest in business infrastructure, things like more resilient processing facilities, which benefit farmers more indirectly. So our findings indicate that agri-SME level investments in climate action are trickling down to farmers, more evidence that agri-SMEs are critical engines of impact for farming communities. Today, we're here to talk about business development services. Sorry if you can stay on the last slide, Casey, for just one moment. So our capacity building services, what we call advisory services, have played a really critical role in building this whole climate finance portfolio that we have with agri-SMEs. Our advisory team has been involved from beginning to end of climate deals, helping businesses identify priority climate interventions for their context, co-creating viable climate investment plans, and supporting loan due diligence and monitoring. So I'll hand the microphone off to Rose to walk through some specific examples in Uganda. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, Cassie. It's nice to be here. My name is Rose Ochieng, and I'm the Director for Advisory in Africa. I'm actually based here in Nairobi. Nice to be here. So in terms of the advisory services, and when we talk about advisory, we are basically talking about the technical assistance support that we offer. And we offer technical assistance across 4 main service areas. We do business management advisory, agronomy and climate resilience advisory, digital business intelligence, and then we do gender as a cross-cutting service. Now, we categorize our clients into 2. Their lead clients and then their existing clients. So the lead clients are those clients that are within our pipeline, but have not started receiving lending from us. Then we have existing clients who are actually clients that are already receiving lending from our facility. Now, with the lead clients, we only offer business management advice. So we're building your business so that then you can become bankable and start receiving lending services from us. But then if you're an existing client, then you receive the bundle of advisory services that we offer across the 3 service areas that I've just mentioned. Now, in terms of Accra, the first point of contact for most of our advisory service is a diagnostic. So Accra is no exception. What we do with our clients first when we're offering agronomy and climate resilience advisory is we run a diagnostic, and we call it an agronomic diagnostic. The diagnostic helps us to do a climate risk assessment with the business to help us to understand really what are the climate risks that the business is facing, what are the gaps that they have in terms of their capacity, in terms of innovation, and then what type of mitigation strategies can they put in place in terms of climate adaptation and climate mitigation to be able to cap these risks. Now, what we then do after doing the diagnostic is we come to a process where we do co-creation together with the clients. The co-creation process helps us to develop a climate action plan, which literally says that these are the climate risks that we've identified. These are our gaps as an organization or agribusiness. And so these are the climate adaptation and mitigation strategies that we will put in place to cap these risks. Now, the climate action plan is a living document in the sense that the climate risks that the clients face change from time to time. And because we are building their capacity, there are efforts that we're putting in place together with the businesses to address some of these. So these change over time. There's some that they will be able to address, others that they'll still remain as a gap. And we do a diagnostic after every 2 years. Now, that helps us then, as together with the business, to develop this climate action plan that is a living document that they can reiterate and change as they address their gaps and meet or address the gaps that they have within the businesses. Now, with the climate action plan, once we have that in place, what we do is we do a climate vulnerability workshop. The climate vulnerability workshop is different because it's not a one-on-one intervention that we have with the advisors and the businesses. We bring different businesses together, so we can have anything from 5 to maybe 10 businesses. We bring them to a hotel for a period of 3 days. And in these 3 days, what we do is that we create a platform through which they can exchange ideas, be able to really define what their risks are, but also share experiences, because the beauty of our portfolio is we have clients at different levels of growth. And so the challenges that they may be facing may be different. Some of them would have already had experiences with addressing some of these risks. And so they can share these experiences during the climate vulnerability workshop. But beyond that, they're also then through the climate vulnerability workshop, they're also able to map out the activities and interventions that they go through throughout the season of the value chain that they're working in. So we group together in the climate vulnerability workshop different businesses in different value chains. So if your coffee, will do a separate workshop for you, for macadamia nuts, and also for cocoa. Now, after the climate vulnerability workshop, because of the experiences and the exchanges that they have had, the businesses go back to their own businesses and decide, what exactly to prioritize within their climate action plan. So it's almost like they had this document before the workshop, they've had the workshop, they've had all these exchanges, they go back and then they define what to prioritize in the action plan. Once they've decided what to prioritize in the action plan, then we come in. And then we agree together with them that given the resources that they have, what activities can they actually implement? And oftentimes as Root, we then have 2 facilities that we offer them. As Lizzie mentioned, we have the grants and we have the climate loans. Now, we have had examples where, we have used the grants and worked together with the businesses to implement some of these activities, and they range from irrigation kits to organic fertilizer, to biodigesters, to solar panels, just depending on what the need is and what they have prioritized. The grants have really helped us to test and to pilot these different interventions and be able to develop a return on investment and a real business case on the interventions themselves that then we can also share with other businesses as they determine and decide what interventions they want to put in place. Now, that's the grants. Then we also have the loans. And oftentimes what has happened, because our grants are small, from 10,000 to 20,000 USD, what then the businesses are able to do is that they're then able to take interventions and scale them up using the climate loans that we offer. Next slide, please. Now, I'll give an example of 2 businesses. The first one is a business that was actually able to take a grant and a loan from us. So they're called Rubanga Cooperative Society. They're based in Uganda, and they're in Mitoma district. Now, they actually have about 12,800 farmers, and they were able to take a grant of 20,000 USD and buy solar irrigation kits, which they distributed to their farmers. Now, they did this through the SACCO. The reason why they chose the SACCO is because it was an existing structure within their cooperative that they could use and develop a revolving fund mechanism that would allow then that money to be available once the farmers pay it back for other farmers to take and also take loans for the irrigation kits. The SACCOs also helped in the sense that because it's an existing structure, it is very formalized within the cooperative. There's an eligibility criteria. You still have to be a member of the SACCO, buy shares. You still have to pay the interest when you're paying back your loan. And so again, it increases the capital base within the SACCO, but ensures that there's that sustainability, of the grant or of the capital within the SACCO. So we're able to, through that, distribute 21 irrigation kits, solar irrigation kits to farmers. What happened was during the implementation of this project, we also realized that a lot of the farmers that could access the solar irrigation kits had to have farms that were pretty large, so 5 acres and above, and that the maintenance of the irrigation kits themselves was pretty expensive. And so then that prompted the discussion again of how can we get other options in terms of irrigation kits that would be more suitable for farmers that had smaller farms. And I'll give an example when I'm talking about the next case study. Now, that was the grant for Rubanga. There's also the loan that they took from us. Casey, please give me the next slide. So with the loan, they were able to secure a facility of 185,000 USD, which they used to do two things. The first one is they set up a coffee solar dryer. For those who don't know, the solar dryer is literally like a greenhouse. And what it has is that it then has drying racks inside. And then it allows the cooperative to be able to dry their coffee when it's raining or when it's not. Now, we have found that because of climate change, it's raining more and more during the time that they're harvesting coffee. So the solar dryers help them to maintain the quality of the coffee because they're able to dry to the right moisture content and be able to sell at a good price, right? And then they use 20,600 USD to buy the solar dryers and to set them up. And they use the difference to actually expand their tree nursery. Now, as I mentioned earlier, they're a very big cooperative. They have very many farmers. And so their initial market for the seedlings was actually their own farmers. But also they were then able to ensure that they're giving their farmers the right crop varieties or seedlings, and those are the resilient coffee varieties. And so be able to, at the end of the day, also ensure that they're maintaining the quality, and they can also maintain the quantity of coffee once the farmers are able to grow those trees and to be able to harvest. So with that in mind, the terms of the loan was a 5-year term, and they were able to get it at a 4% interest rate. And it's important for me to mention that they got the loan alongside the working capital. So the climate loan does not affect the working capital that they already hold with Root Capital. Now, the last example is Kasali. And with Kasali, again, this is just to reiterate that we looked at a separate option, which is the irrigation kits that could be used for smaller farms. So what we did is we went into a partnership with Kickstart, and we're able to identify treadle pumps that farmers could use for farm sizes of 2 acres and below. And with that, then we were able to get a lot more farmers taking up the irrigation kits. In Kasali, we used the same method like we did in Rubanga, where we integrated the grant within the SACCO, which was already existing within the cooperative. And so with Kasali, you can see some of the findings. It was about 15 farmers were able to take up the irrigation kits, and 35% of them were actually women. Now, the beauty with the irrigation kits is just beyond irrigating the coffee, it also allows for additional income generation activities, and that includes irrigating for vegetables, especially for the women, but also for individual farmers who are then setting up tree nurseries. They're also able to use the treadle pumps for that. So we're doing a second project with both Kasali and Rubanga, where we're working with Kickstart to distribute the treadle pumps with a grant offering of the actual pumps. So we're giving 30 pumps Again, when the farmers take up the pumps, they're able to pay back through the SACCO, build the capital base, and we hope that that revolving fund can continue to grow and more farmers can take up the irrigation kits. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nuru Capital team. Really appreciate the presentation there. And you have Rose and Elizabeth emails on the slide if you would like to reach out to them directly. Alvin, I know you've arrived. I want to make sure that you're able to come on and take on the next set of slides for presentation. Are you able to? There you are. Great. And Alvin, feel free to introduce yourself as you introduce One Acre Fund when I change the next slide. So I'll pass it over to you.
Right. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Rose and Elizabeth and the team from Root Capital. Really great work that you're doing there. So glad to be here. My name is Alvin Otim from One Acre Ventures, which is the investment arm of One Acre Fund, the Pan-African NGO that has been supporting farmers for 20 years now. So just to give you an introduction, and I guess it would be a good place to start by just speaking lightly about One Acre Fund, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then later I'll talk about the work that we do as One Acre Ventures and the work that we're doing specifically to support climate resilience within our smallholder farmers. So Casey, next slide, please. Right. So just starting from One Acre Ventures' point of view, as I said, we are part of the One Acre Fund family, and One Acre Fund is an NGO that is present in 10 countries across Africa, whose main aim is really to uplift smallholder livelihoods. And this is mainly through providing high quality inputs, expert advisory, and making market connections for market access. So I'll just start by explaining the One Acre Fund point of view. So One Acre Fund, engages farmers directly, as I said, by providing high quality inputs, advisory, and market access. But for so long, we've focused on the inputs and productivity side of things without really solving for the market access part, which for us, upon review, was really the missing middle and the missing chain to really complete our cycle of uplifting these smallholders' livelihoods. So just to paint a picture for you, say a maize and beans farmer in rural Rwanda who has been working with One Acre Fund for 5 years and has consistently seen increases in their productivity, so they're getting more out of their land. However, what we realized is that these farmers, to really actually realize the extra income, have to sell to, say, an aggregator, a middleman in their community, or even an agribusiness that's going to buy off their produce and actually process it into a final good. However, we saw that the SMEs in these communities that were actually in constant interaction with these farmers and who would be the buyers of this produce were actually underfunded. And underfunded due to the many reasons that I think we all know, with traditional finance not really being adapted to the needs of agribusinesses. And so you find that all the hard work or majority of the hard work that One Acre Fund has done in giving this farmer quality seed, giving them advice on when to weed their garden and to harvest, goes down the drain because the SMEs within the community are just not capitalized enough to be able to purchase from this farmer at a fair price that makes sense and really rewards them for all the hard work that they put in. So for us, the gap and the next level of support to our farmers was really to deploy capital into these agri-SMEs. And for us as a fund, the way we define agri-SMEs is businesses that have been in operation for at least 3 years, are legally registered, and are doing turnovers of about $250,000 to $300,000 in annual revenue, right? So that's our kind of class of SMEs that we actually invest in. And the reason for this segmentation is that, one, these at this stage, these businesses are large enough to actually have significant impact in their communities, but also from a funds deployment point of view, it's almost similar work for us to invest a $1 million ticket size versus putting in effort to invest a $500,000 ticket size. So for us, this was where the sweet spot is currently. So as you see on the slide, really, the key things that we're trying to solve for with our funding is address sort of working capital gaps, because oftentimes, farmers have grown their crops, they have, made a bountiful harvest, but then, if the SME does not have enough capital on hand to buy from the farmer, then all of that goes to waste. Oftentimes, farmers get, out-bargained on their crops, they're given really low prices, that then discourage them from, putting in all the effort, following all the regenerative practices. And at the end of the day, in some cases, we've seen actually abandoning some value chains all at once. So that's why working capital is important to us. And then obviously CapEx, especially for businesses that are growing, that need to expand, for example, their processing facilities, their storage facilities. That's another point that we fund. And what makes us really different and stand out from other investors in the region is that we pair this with technical assistance. So the technical assistance is not a by the way, but it's a combined package that comes with every investment. So say we invest 500,000 into a coffee processing SME in Rwanda, we set aside about 10 to 15% of that investment as additional capital that then goes towards, one, improving the business's operations. So setting up things like the proper accounting system, hiring the right kind of people, working towards a certification so that this SME can open up new markets, as well as how do we work with more farmers and bring them into the ecosystem, right? So we're really trying to solve for that missing middle, whereby farmers have done all the good work, but the businesses that then are supposed to support the farmers are undercapitalized. And that's through a combination of the working capital, CapEx, and then our technical assistance. Next slide, Casey. Right. So really, why do we do this, and what do we want to achieve by supporting these agri-SMEs, right? So with this diagram, you'll see that much of our portfolio and the way we actually, so majority of how we source our businesses is really through our One Acre Fund network. And the fund right now is active across Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania, but still looking to grow into other markets. And a key source of credible pipeline for us is the One Acre Fund team that has actually worked with the farmers and speaking with the farmers and going deep down to the communities and saying, which are the businesses that you sell your produce to? Who actually buys from you at the end of the season? So with that, we're able to know and single out businesses that are intentionally working with farmers and those that have a clear track record. Because in our experience, farmers that are not happy with a certain company will actually say it, and it's a measure of trust of how the business has actually interacted with these farmers. So we are sure that our network of farmers, as well as field agents, as well as our team, are able to recommend really good companies that speak to our mission of really supporting smallholder farmers. So, as I said, the sweetener for us is really the technical assistance, because through that, we're able to sit down with an entrepreneur, look at the business and say, how do you grow to 2 times the revenue in five years? And with that, what is stopping you from actually growing to that level, right? So it's really a co-creation process, so that we do not feel like, so that entrepreneurs don't feel like whatever we're recommending is really just from a financier's point of view, and they're just doing it just to tick a box. But we make sure that all the technical assistance programs are directly aligned to the business's goals, and the business actually sees value in spending time in making deep dives into what these problems are and what possible solutions can we come up with. So with that, the goal is to really move these businesses from being, basic, low data businesses to businesses that are really intentional about their growth and actually use data to inform many of their solutions and their growth. So through that, we're able to build more resilient businesses that are better equipped to then buy from the farmers, so that at the end of the day, we're able to close the loop, and the farmer is happy because they're getting they're getting income through a fair price that is offered by these businesses. But then the businesses also know that these farmers are loyal to them and are actually going to provide them with high quality output that they can then sell. So it's a win-win solution for everyone. And it really emphasizes and reinforces all the work that we do as a One Acre Fund family. Next slide, Casey. Yeah. So here, just to reiterate really our scale as One Acre Fund. So we're present in over 10 countries. And the reason, we're strategic about where we are placed is that almost 2/3 of our smallholders in Africa live across 8 of these markets where we are placed. So to give you a sense of our locations, is we have presence in Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Zambia, Malawi, and then a pilot in Nigeria, as well as something going on in DRC. So with that, we're able to have a clear understanding of what the needs of smallholder farmers are. And One Acre Ventures then builds off this incredible platform and work that One Acre Fund has done to really tailor capital and also technical assistance to really support over the 5.5 million households of smallholder farmers that we actually support across these markets. So, next slide. Yes. And a big part of really the work that we do and the capital we deploy is the aim of moving a business up the ladder. So from a small SME that is just making $300,000 up to an SME that is able to even take on DFI kind of capital. And so here you will see that the sort of the spectrum of businesses that we intend to work with. Right now, we're really at the stage where we're working with SMEs, as I said, working with about 500 to 3,000 farmers. And the goal there is to be often the first institutional investor, set in place clear governance systems, climate adaptation support, and then be able to hand those over in, say, 5 years or so to now ourselves when we're at that level, or even a larger funder, as you can see on the screen. But ultimately, the goal is really to walk the journey with these agri-SMEs from when they're really small businesses up to the point where they can take on really large institutional capital. And the goal in mind is for them to continue to work with as many farmers as possible, just so that we're making sure that our capital actually goes to supporting smallholder farmers at the end of the day. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So having given you sort of an overview of what we do as One Acre Ventures on the capital side, I thought it great for us to just dive into this example of how we intentionally deploy our technical assistance, especially on helping these agri-SMEs become more climate resilient. And our example here comes from a chili exporting company in Rwanda that works with over 5,000 farmers. But as they've grown, and as I mentioned earlier, we want to package our TA in a way that it matches the business's goals. So this company recently opened up buyers in Europe, in the UK, and in the Asian markets. However, these markets require a certain level, a high quality of chili that the business was only starting to implement, and only a few of its farmer base would be able to supply this kind of chili. So when we sat down with this company, we realized that the critical point where things went wrong was actually at the seedling stage. And upon further inspection, we realized that because of the variable climate and the changes in the season, when farmers would actually take the chili seedlings and plant them, they would take longer to actually grow, or there would be quite a high number, about 60% of seedlings would actually not germinate, which one meant that these farmers were losing out on their crop, but also these farmers were getting discouraged to continue actually in chili farming. So our solution that we really co-created with this business was how do we support this business to actually support the farmers to grow high quality chili seedlings, which in the end of the season will result in high quality output. And the key intervention there was a greenhouse, which would act as a nursery, and jointly between One Acre Ventures and the company Fisher Global, we would then hand this greenhouse over to a youth group, which would then run this seedling nursery and actually sell the seedlings to the outgrowers in the community. So with this intervention, we saw that one, farmers are able to reduce sort of the seedling death rate and have more seeds actually turn into seedlings, which means that for every dollar they spent, they're able to at least multiply that at least 2 times. Previously, farmers were really frustrated with this, and the company was actually losing out on its chili farmers and not able to fulfill its export contracts. So this is an example of how we are thinking about climate adaptation support. For us, it doesn't even only start at the technical assistance level, but even within the value chains that we selected to invest in, we intentionally selected value chains that are sort of climate resilient. So we have most of our target crops are sort of tree crops, where we were able to do intercropping, we're able to maximize the yield through organic manure and fertilizer, and we're still able to have a ready market because majority of these crops are actually export oriented, so they have a stable demand. So meaning the business sees the value in actually implementing these climate smart practices. The farmers also get a fair price for all the work that they've done, and we're able to actually make more investments with that climate lens as part of our investment criteria. Yeah. So I think this should be the last slide, Casey. Allow me to
Yeah.
hand over the mic back to you.
Thank you, Alvin. Tracy, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate being here today. And I'll introduce myself first, and then I'll dive into a few closing remarks before we wrap it up today with some Q&A. So I'm Tracy Bain, Executive Director of the Climate Action for Smallholders Coalition. Again, really happy to be here today with some of our members from Root Capital and One Acre Fund. I do want to thank those speakers again. So Rose, Lizzie, Alvin, thank you so much for taking the time to actually put together these fantastic overviews of your programs, as well as walk us through what the structure looks like and how you guys are supporting agri-SMEs. And then, of course, Casey, Ramona, thank you both for inviting us to join your webinar today and to participate in this event and in your webinar series that you guys are hosting. This is really an excellent resource for the community. So a few closing thoughts and highlights before we move into Q&A that I wanted to touch on today after hearing our speakers. To start, our coalition focuses on developing the technical and financial systems needed for smallholder farming communities to transition from profitable regenerative agriculture and build climate resilience. But what really struck me today from this discussion is that the importance of taking an ecosystem lens when looking at connecting smallholder farmers to climate and other types of large-scale capital. I think Alvin was the one that noted, this is an ecosystem. And it's not just the individual smallholder farmers, but really what is that safety net, that system, that community that you're building around them to really enable them to build resilience and prosperity over time. And I like the term that I think Lizzie used, and Rose and Alvin, you all use this term, missing middle. I thought that was such a perfect term to use because, it really outlines exactly that critical role that agri-SMEs play in this ecosystem for these smallholder farming communities. We heard from my colleagues today that these agri-SMEs are providing different types of technical assistance. We saw some of the treadle pump examples in the greenhouse just recently and heard about the solar irrigation kits, as well as some of those operational support services as well. They can offer greater market access, drive some of these technological and regenerative practice innovations. But we also really understood from these conversations today that agri-SMEs can be that conduit for larger financial resources, investments to come into these smallholder farming communities. But the other thing that struck me coming out of these conversations is that agri-SMEs themselves also need technical assistance and financial support themselves to grow and professionalize, improve those operations, as well as improve their bankability so they can access larger, more structured capital. So what I like to think about in that case is you think about that you have this system, these smallholder farmers, next these agri-SMEs, then you have these organizations that are coming in like Root Capital, One Acre Ventures. I kind of like to think of them as the extension of the missing middle, or maybe the missing middle support team. And these organizations are coming in with decades of experience, working directly in smallholder farming communities. And they can bring that right kind of technical assistance and right size of flexible, affordable capital to really help these businesses grow. And when I say that, what I mean is for the right size of capital in particular, these organizations can access these larger types of investment funding pools, set up these ventures or these funds themselves, and be able to then dole out, whether it's smaller types of grants or smaller types of loans, the right size of flexible, affordable capital that these agri-SMEs can use most effectively to really help them grow. Then they pair that with really targeted technical assistance As we heard from both these organizations, they actually work with them to come up with like climate action plans and strategic plans to help their business grow. And together, that assistance and capital really helps support and uplift these agri-SMEs. So the last thing I'll just say is, through this broader ecosystem lens, what we've heard today is how strengthened agri-SMEs can become engines of community growth. Filling the gaps. I heard this a lot today and in advance when we were chatting about this, as these agri-SMEs are filling those gaps between those smallholder producers, as well as some of this regional and global technical and financial opportunities that allow these farming communities to really scale and thrive. So thank you again, Casey, Ramona, everyone for inviting me as well to be here today and give some closing remarks. And thank you again to our fantastic speakers, my colleagues. And I will hand it back to you, Casey, to take us into our Q&A session.
No, thank you, Tracy. Great closing comments, kind of summarizing a lot of the themes that came out of today's presentations. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we try to finish, on time to respect people's busy schedules who've joined us today. We have a series of discussion questions, but I was also taking notes in the chat and seeing kind of some of the trends that were coming out. And I can also see our panelists are also responding to questions in the chat as well. So a few themes that I was seeing from some of the participants thinking about agri-SME segmentation, so aligned with this first discussion question. What are the archetypes and the types of technical assistance needed and financing needed for different agri-SMEs at different stages of their business development? The types of loan structures. So in a second, I might ask Root Capital to respond to one of those earlier questions to give a kind of an overview of the different types of loan structures you have as well, and how they reach some of those different archetypes of businesses. And then thinking about differences between the two models and synergies that exist. I think that's something that is really important for us to discuss more about, especially around scale and finance, is how we work together across the sector, and how we think about that. So if anyone from the panel has thoughts on those points, please do feel free to come in. And then finally, kind of giving maybe some examples of how other financing was unlocked from your efforts on the ground. So before I open it up to anyone in the panel, I want to just ask anyone from the audience, I want to ask my panelists if they have a desire to respond to any of those points immediately or follow up on their presentation from that summary of those questions that were in the chat. If you do, Lizzie or Rose, if you want to come off mute and say anything, or Alvin follow up, please do feel free.
Thank you,
Hi,
Casey.
can I come in?
Oh, or someone just spoke.
I think it was Alvin, but Lizzie, maybe you go first, Alvin second, just to keep it in order of who I heard on my audio.
Okay, thank you. A lot of different questions in the chat, which I'll also try to respond in writing in a moment. I think, yeah, maybe just also related to kind of the different flavors of capital and the different ticket sizes. One thing I really wanted to emphasize from what Rose shared is with agri-SMEs in particular, yeah, we're really seeing kind of, you could say, two broad categories of opportunities. We're seeing opportunities to invest directly in the agri-SME, in building out, especially their farmer support services, making sure that they're resilient as a business, recognizing that they're kind of the biggest impact they have is being able to pay farmers a fair price on time for their crop every year, and you have to preserve that and protect that through climate shocks. So that looks like things like the coffee dryers we spoke to. We make investments in clean energy, right, in solarization of processing facilities, in nurseries, et cetera. And then there's a second opportunity that Rose spoke to of really building up the agri-SME's capacity to distribute climate finance directly to farmers, right? And we're seeing that there are a lot of investments that farmers need to make themselves. They need to pay for labor, for example, right? That's increasingly a need with regenerative practices, which often carry a higher labor need. Farmers often need to hire that. They can't fully cover it within their family. And so the work that Rose mentioned around building the capacity of savings and credit cooperative organizations, of SACCOs, or other farmer financing structures within these agri-SMEs is critical. It's a on a ticket size level, it's a smaller opportunity, right? Because you're talking about financing that is going to reach farmers maybe $200, right, to buy a treadle pump, or $1,000 to buy a solar irrigation pump, or somewhere in between to pay for labor. And so the SACO each individual SACO may not be able to absorb that much capital, but really building that distribution network that we think when functioning as a network, really has capacity to provide significant volumes of climate finance to farmers when it's needed, at the price that it's needed. They're often able to provide that financing to farmers at a much cheaper rate than other local lenders, and understanding what farmers need season to season. So we're kind of trying to do both within Root Capital and our climate finance work, recognizing that there's no silver bullet, right? And we need to be placing capital in different ways. Thank you.
Rose, did you want to follow on anything there? I saw you come off video just to stay on Root Capital for a second before we jump to you, Alvin.
Sure. Maybe just to mention that with financing at the two levels, so at the agribusiness, but also at the farmer level through the SACO, it's important because you need, as Lizzie had said, you need both, right? You need both to function. When you're talking about quality of produce and quantity of produce for the agribusiness, really what you're talking about is the farmer's ability to do that, right? And so you can't finance the agribusiness and expect them to reach that level without necessarily thinking about the farmers. So we see like there's a correlation between the two, and so the importance to have both of them working. And I think for us, it's the way that our model works. It enables us to do exactly that and to provide the financing when it's needed, and in the amount that is also required. Because also the way that the loan is structured at the SACO is that it is structured within the season of coffee. So it's not like a monthly payment by the farmers, but it's the check-off. Where they supply to the cooperative, and then the cooperative pays the SACO at the end of the season, and then they cut, they cut what they need to cut from the farmers. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Alvin, did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I think just a point on sort of the collaboration between, Root Capital and sort of One Acre Ventures. Let me just switch. Yeah. You can see me. Yeah. So I think, opportunities for collaboration, I think, are really there. One that even Rose was just mentioning is, so Root Capital would work with a cooperative. Right now, we don't work as a cooperative, but possibly in the future we would. So, I mean, because we are still in the same sort of geographic areas, and I think what the ecosystem needs to grow is really have that ladder of capital. And so, our small farmer organizations still need support, which I feel Root Capital would be well placed to do that. And then say, if there's an SME in the community that, is buying produce from farmers and is formally registered, that's when we would come in. Because oftentimes, and the reason really that missing middle, comes about is, I mean, there's a whole issue of risk, whether perceived risk or real risk. But then, there needs to be a ladder of support and financing that really needs to support sort of the ecosystem, both from, just an innovation point of view, but even as farm organizations become more formal and grow and really become registered. I think a good example for it is how sort of SACCOs in the Kenyan space have really become an engine for sort of financial inclusion, and actually are sort of driving the finance sector in Kenya. And so these farm organizations and cooperatives are really important to build that base on which everything else can thrive. So I think that was an area of collaboration. And maybe Liz or Rose, just correct me if I'm wrong, but Root Capital would do trade finance, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, so we do both. We do trade finance, which is financing, basically the crop that has been harvested and making sure the agri-SME has the capital on hand to pay farmers on time and a fair price. We also do what we call climate finance, which is a lot of what we just talked about right now, which are these CapEx investments in business infrastructure, or the financing that is going ultimately to farmers through agri-SMEs to support these regenerative farm investments. There was a question about whether we do that both on our balance sheet, and the answer is yes right now, though that may change in the future due to the different risk profiles of those two flavors of capital.
Yeah. And just to round out that point, I mean, as One Acre Ventures, we moved away from trade finance just because of, the risk appetite we're able to take, and now offering more mezzanine debt. So by mezzanine debt, I mean sort of longer term loans that take on more of sort of equity risk, because we're investing really in businesses that are setting up processes for the first time, are really opening up markets for the first time. So it's almost like we are equity investors, but we're given a loan. So that matching of risk and return, we've chosen to do that through our mezzanine loans, which have tenors from 1 year up to 5 years. So there's definitely a lot of room for collaboration. I just want to touch on one more point in terms of
Alvin, we're gonna run out of time, unfortunately. Yeah, no worries. I felt like that was a natural point. If you wanted to share with the group and you put it in the chat now, we'll capture it, or we can make sure you can send it to Ramona and I, and we can make sure it makes it into the follow-up content for everybody that gets hosted on the AMEA website. So we'll have to close, unfortunately. There were some other good questions in the chat too, especially digging into discussion. I see that Mark Blackett, the network director for AMEA, also had some good comments on this like really reframing some of the questions on the screen about where the biggest bottlenecks are, technical assistance. I think there's a lot more for us to talk about. And I think that's one of the nice things that comes out of these presentations and these webinars is we're learning more about each other. We're sharing data, we're sharing information, which is a key feature of what AMEA wants to accomplish in the sector, in particular around agri-SME, BDS, and technical assistance. And then linking that back to environmental outcomes and impact on the ground for climate resilience. And so I'll stop there by saying thank you all so much for taking this time. Thank you, Cash Coalition, Tracy and the team. Thank you, Root Capital team. Thank you, Alvin, as well from One Acre Ventures. This is recorded. It'll be shared after. And we're also open to continuing the conversation. There's an environmental working group at AMEA that is open to new members and interested strategic partners. And you're all welcome to reach out to myself, Ramona, Mark, to discuss that more with us too. But just to try to keep it on time, I'll stop there and thank you all one last time and just let everyone from the panel say goodbye to the audience. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much to AMEA for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Annette. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you so much. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.